Good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna wait a few more minutes to let people log in. So we'll be starting in a few minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sharon Okoye, and I'm the president of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials Connecticut chapter, and I will be moderating the webinar today. For this webinar, there will be a discussion on the Connecticut Department of Transportation's 5-year capital plan, including its development process and the programming of upcoming major projects around the state. There will also be a discussion on the small business certification process. Could you go back one, please? Right, thank you. I would like to acknowledge and thank our event sponsors, Beta Group, GARG and Consulting Services, FHI Studio, Chinbro Construction, AECOM, T. White Lynn International Group, WSP, and HDR. Thank you so much for your support. Next slide, please. A little bit about COMTO. COMTO is an organization that advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the transportation industry. Our mission is to ensure that there's maximum participation for minority professionals, historically underutilized businesses, and communities of color in the transportation industry. Our membership includes professionals as well as nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, students, transit authorities, transportation agencies, corporations, and HUBs. So I encourage you to go to our national website, comtonational.org, and learn more about our organization, and I encourage you to join our local chapter. Next, please. Just a little housekeeping before we get started and before I introduce the speakers. Our microphones have been muted except for the presenters. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please send the chat to the chat box. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to attendees. You can add questions to the Q&A box during the presentations, as we will have a Q&A after the speakers are finished. Next, please. So I want to welcome our speakers and introduce them. First, we have Mark Ralph, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Mark has been with the department for 35 years and has led major projects, including CT Fast Track and the $2 billion Q Bridge program, the Pearl Harbor Memorial Bridge, the nation's first Estrados Cable Stayed Bridge. In 2017, Mark was named the Chief Engineer and Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Engineering and Construction, overseeing a staff of approximately 1,000 engineering professionals with the responsibility for the department's $1.6 billion capital program. Mark was appointed to the Deputy Commissioner's position by Commissioner Giletti in August of 2019. I also want to welcome Deborah Gauss, our Contract Compliance Manager for the department. Deborah has over 30 years of civil rights experience. She's responsible for the development and the implementation of a compliant and results-oriented civil rights program to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. Deborah administers the on-the-job training program, as well as the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, Title VI, and Environmental Justice Activities, limited English proficiency compliance, and the contractor compliance programs. Deborah is a member of AASHTO Civil Rights Subcommittee and other service-related organizations that serve underserved communities. I want to welcome you both, and I will turn it over to Mark Ralph.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon. It's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. You can go to the next slide. That'd be good. So here's just a quick overview. Sharon already mentioned that I'm going to be sharing the presentation with Deborah Goss, who leads our Office of Contract Compliance. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be speaking for the most part today about our 5-year capital plan. We'll also talk about some projects that are coming forward, but with respect to the capital plan, we'll be looking to answer 3 basic questions. What is in the capital plan? How do projects get there? How do they become part of the capital plan? And then the what is included, what projects are part of the plan. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the extent of the Department of Transportation infrastructure. DOT is a multimodal agency encompassing all surface transportation projects and programs. We used to have an aeronautics and a maritime bureau, but they have since been split away, and they're now separate authorities within the state of Connecticut. So the extent of our infrastructure includes over 3,000 centerline miles of state maintained roadways. You click again. There are 105 miles of state-owned rail service. Connecticut is pretty unique within most states in terms of how much rail service we actually own, including all of Metro North service in Connecticut. We also own and manage Connecticut Transit bus service in 8 service areas. We have 495 highway buildings that are owned around the state. Those purple circles are only the major ones. 495 is a lot of buildings. There are 2,786 traffic signals around the state that are DOT owned and maintained. More traffic signals in Connecticut than the rest of New England combined are owned by the state DOT. And then over 4,000 roadway bridges, and those are located all around the state. Big bridges, little bridges, small arterial roads, and major highways. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of other state assets all around the state that we maintain every single day. You can see from this map, though, we touch every corner of the state. We're in every single town. We hit some of the towns multiple times, particular cities, but we're everywhere in the state of Connecticut. Next slide, please. So what is our capital plan? It's an annual 5-year report to inform stakeholders about the past year's program and outline the plan for the upcoming 5-year period. It's not just a list of projects. It is. It also includes a narrative that includes historical achievements, trends, and major issues. It describes how the department plans to address critical transportation needs and current challenges, along with how we're going to go about maintaining Connecticut's aging transportation infrastructure. It includes a comprehensive financial summary of capital expenditures of both state and federal dollars and across all modes. The data presented in the report is on a federal fiscal year basis. That's to be consistent with our federal partners. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a graph. It shows program authorizations. So authorizations are what the legislature authorizes us to borrow to pay for capital program expenditures. It is not how much we spent, it's how much we're authorized to spend, and it's borrowing. So the bottom blue portion of the bar is federal funding. Above that is state bonding authorizations for past years and current years. So those are actual numbers. The purple bars, those were, you've heard Let's Go CT as a term described. So there was a ramp up contemplated within Let's Go CT to the higher level of expenditure. And those purple bars represent that ramp up funding. Unfortunately, the revenues to support Let's Go CT did not follow what the scope of that program was. So after 2020, the ramp up funding ended. It was supposed to be replaced by a much larger program. And of course, that didn't happen. And the revenue stream that was anticipated from tolling or other sources just never happened. So we've been in the news a lot lately talking about other ways to raise revenue. So that left us with our base program, which is roughly $1.6 billion per year in authorizations. Next slide. So in contrast to the last slide, these are actual expenditures. And you can see our historical numbers. We went from just over $1.2 billion in 2010 to about $1.6 billion last year. And we're on a trend to spend even more than that this year. So again, it's a stacked bar. So the bottom is actual construction. Above that, the light blue is procurements. That's typically equipment procurements for rolling stock. So those are buses and rail coaches. The red is engineering and right-of-way. The yellow is grants to municipalities. And then there's an other category for miscellaneous expenses. Next slide. This is a pie chart showing how we've spent our dollars. On the left is for fiscal year 2020. On the right is for 21. Those are estimated dollars this year. So you can see that the light blue portion of both is what was typically advertised through our bid portal. And that's what people typically identify as here's what DOT is building this year. You can see in 2020, it was $608 million. But I think the point to be made here is that was only 49% of our capital construction budget. There are a number of other projects that we fund, some of them ourselves, such as alternative contracting, but sometimes we pay for things through municipal projects. There is $60 million or 5% of our total capital budget went through our funded municipal projects out of our capital budget. Public transportation spends a great deal of money that we fund through Metro North and other agencies. There are grants, the Community Connectivity Grant Program, the LOTSIP Grant Program. Again, those are projects that we fund that are advertised by others. So when you hear about what DOT is building, it's much more than what we just advertise out of our own bid portal. And then if you look to the right, that's the fiscal year 2021. Those are estimated numbers. The big difference between the two, the alternative contracting is driven in large part by what's happening in Norwalk at the Walk Bridge program, where we've got that enormous project, which is being done using an alternative contracting method. Instead of a straight low bid, it's a construction manager at risk, a special form of that called CMGC, construction manager general contractor. So we bring the general contractor on board at the same time we're designing the project, hopefully to root out any construction issues and challenges during the design phase as opposed during construction. But again, you can see the distribution of projects all across our programs, funded in a variety of ways. It's not just that capital construction program through our bid portal. Next slide, please. Okay, this is really the same information that we're shown in the pie charts, just in bar graphs. So you can see on the left side, this is program dollars, so how much we're spending. So in 2020, it was 1.2 billion. 2021, it's up close to 2 billion, again, driven by that large alternative contracting bar, the brown piece on the top for Walk Bridge program. On the right-hand side, this, instead of talking program dollars, we're talking numbers of projects. So in 2020, there were 285 different projects that we put out as part of our capital construction program. And in 2021, that number is 323 projects. Again, put out through a variety of different mechanisms. Actually, the light blue portion is what's through our construction portal. You can see in terms of numbers of projects, that's one of the smaller pieces of it. So there are a lot of things that DOT does that aren't just have the DOT logo on them. It's done through a variety of ways. Next slide, please. So we like this this graphic here because it sort of tells a story of how a project gets identified, and then, but more importantly, how it ultimately gets included in the capital plan. So it starts down at the bottom. So we identify potential projects through a variety of ways: quarter studies, planning documents, federal regulations and mandates. The regional council of governments have a say, as does the legislature and the municipalities. We use a data-driven analysis to identify where project needs are for safety issues, for congestion, for state of good repair. And then we define a purpose and need for each project. Then we categorize the projects by scale and scope. We determine if there's a clearly defined solution. We decide whether the project, does it provide an enhancement or an improvement? Is it part of a major program or initiative, something that's ongoing that we need to continue to fund? The third step is we apply metrics to it. We look at our asset management system, which is near and dear to Sharon's heart, I know. And we apply a whole range of different metrics. We look to see if the strategic goals of the department are being met. We quantify projects by type, looking at mobility for all users, safety across all modes. Does it maintain or enhance condition of our assets? And there are other factors that we look at besides those. Freight movement around the state is an important one, as is economic development. Often those two are related. And then we also gauge community input and involvement. The fourth step is we solicit feedback. So we look to engage our stakeholders. We regularly engage the Council of Governments through monthly coordination meetings. The STIP-TIP process is another opportunity for folks to be involved. Feedback, and we consider feedback throughout the development, design, and construction of all of our projects. And then the last step is we program projects by assigning them to a specific funding source. So that we take the project cost estimate, we draw down the available funding within each funding category, and then we consider other factors like regional and geographic diversity, We seek to strike a balance between stated good repair and enhancement type work. And of course, we always try to maximize our spending of available grant dollars, federal funds, and other funding sources. And ultimately, all of those get compiled into a capital plan year by year, laying out for the next 5 years how we plan to spend our money. Next. So the capital plan priorities, how do we decide which is more important than others? Well, of course, we need to fund our ongoing obligations. We signed a long-term contract for a project that say costs $100 million. We may only spend a small portion of that in the first year. We need to continue those funding obligations through the years. We always emphasize a state of good repair. We need to maintain the system that we have before we look to expand or enhance it. We want to leverage all available federal funds. Then we look at, okay, how can we best spend those dollars? We want to address bottlenecks and speed impediments across the system, whether it's rail, bus, or vehicles. Active transportation, that's a new buzzword. That's the bike ped enhancements around the state. We look at those. And then, of course, other major programs and initiatives consistent with the strategic plan for the state. Next. So the capital program, it's broken into 3 major categories. Programmed are those projects which are actively being advanced through design. They include projects which are federal state eligible and have either an expectation or actual funding behind them. Over-programmed projects are projects which are actively under development, but we do not have full funding for the construction phase. And there's about $1.8 billion worth of those in our current capital program. And then the final category is those future needs. Those are projects early in the development cycle. They're major projects and programs that are not funded yet, but they are identified in our long-range plan or published studies, and they're just waiting for a funding plan to be put behind them. Next, please. So here are some example projects that are included in our capital plan and the program category for public transportation. So these are projects we're actively developing and will move to construction. There are service improvements planned for the New Haven line. That's Metro North service to Grand Central. So there was just a press conference yesterday talking about the initial projects to move those along in Stratford. There are equipment purchases for the rail fleet, for bus replacements, and then station and facility enhancements. We're building a brand new parking garage in Stamford. We're looking at building a new train station for the Hartford line in Windsor Locks near the airport. And then major improvements for the New Haven Union Station campus. Next, please. So again, these are program projects, but now looking at the highway bridge side. So we always have our capital resurfacing program, what we call our VIP paving program. That's a statewide pavement renewal program. We're looking to upgrade our traffic signal technology across the state. And then we've got a whole bunch of major projects. I won't touch on them all, but Route 8 resurfacing and safety improvements, that's a big design build project that we're just getting started in Derby. The Gold Star Bridge in New London, the northbound structure is undergoing major rehab. Those Gold Star bridges, the twin bridges, are the largest bridges in the state. I-91, I-691, and Route 15 interchange in Meriden. That's a never-ending bottleneck there, many days during the year. So we have a project to undertake congestion mitigation and improvements to that interchange. And then, of course, Route 9 traffic signals. Only traffic signals on a limited access highway in the state, and we're looking to hopefully get those removed. So again, some examples around the state. Next, please. Complete Streets is a new area of emphasis for the department, and that's looking at our town centers, our city centers, and how can we improve the road network without compromising the things that make a city street network livable and desirable for the people who use it. So we have programs that are targeted toward that. Community Connectivity Grant Program. LOTSIP is a very popular program by which municipalities can deliver locally sponsored projects that we fund. And of course, ADA compliance is a thread through all that we do. We do trail sections all around the state. We've done literally dozens of them. You can see here's a list of projects that are in our current plan. Next, please. So moving forward to over-program projects. Again, these are projects that we're actively working on design for, but for which the construction phase is not fully funded yet. So some examples of those projects. The Hartford Line service began several years ago. We're looking to add some additional stations. So we are designing stations, and when we find funding for them, they'll move to construction. Again, in Hartford Line, further down, you'll see 3D double tracking. So that's adding double tracking north of Hartford, which will allow us to increase service on that line and improve travel times. The 7 and 15 interchange in Norwalk, that's the Merritt Parkway and Route 7. And then at the bottom, interchange 16 on 95 in Norwalk is another big project we're looking at. Next, please. So these are future needs. These are major projects that we've identified that there's a need. We're not actively working on them because they're either early in development cycle or there is no hope for funding for them in the near future. So we want to convert our bus fleet to all electric. Very expensive proposition. It's not only acquiring the electric vehicles, but we'll be installing the electric infrastructure at all of our garages is hugely expensive. New Haven line, track speed improvements, that requires big investment in order to achieve the track improvements that we're looking for. And then if you look down at the bottom, the last 5 or 6 items, those are all major initiatives that we have planning studies going on right now that will identify what the scope and timing for those improvements will be. And none of those are cheap. You can just look at them and see, those are big elements of work in Danbury, Waterbury, Bridgeport, near New Haven, and probably the granddaddy of them all, the Greater Hartford Mobility Study, which will look at the entire road and transportation network in the Greater Hartford area. Next, please. One of the things that came out of this legislative session was a new fee, a new revenue source for the Special Transportation Fund. It is not the broad-based revenue stream that we were hoping for as part of Let's Go CT, but the highway use fee. It's a mileage-based fee placed on heavyweight vehicles. Heavyweight vehicles cause most of the damage to our roads and bridges, at least on the highway system. And so this is a calculation for heavy trucks to pay an additional fee to the state. And it's based upon a weighted average rate and the number of miles driven. So truckers will have to maintain logs and file reports and pay taxes based upon that calculation you can see below. So next one. Well, I should say that will provide about $45 million to STF in the first year, and then about $90 million a year when fully implemented. Here's a list of projects that might be enabled by the highway use fee. You can see the electric bus conversion program that I just mentioned. Other big projects, the Stanford Transportation Center. That is a very busy station. About 6 million passengers a year pass through that station. We need to modernize that. Keep moving forward. Next slide. On the highway bridge side, interstate truck parking along our highway system, that is a perpetual problem. If you've ever been on 95 or 84 at night, you can see trucks parked on exit ramps, You can see the service plazas on 95, they're all full with trucks. That's because we do not have a truck parking program. So we need to provide some lots for them to park. And then those major corridors where trucks frequently use them, like I-95 corridor, 84 and 91 through Hartford, the Waterbury, Mixmaster, and Danbury, all of those things will in part be able to be moved forward, at least pieces of them, by funding enabled by the highway use fee. Just a couple words, next slide please, about potential stimulus. A lot of talk in Washington, D.C. these days about an infrastructure bill, renewal of the Surface Transportation Act, and potentially a lot more money coming to the states, Connecticut included, to repair and restore our infrastructure. National emphasis for President Biden. So here in Connecticut at the DOT, we've been preparing for this for months. And typically what we'll look to do is to accelerate delivery of projects that are already in our pipeline. So these are projects that we know have a purpose and need. We know they have a great deal of value. So we're going to accelerate the delivery, whether it's expediting the work that's currently underway or taking a project early in development and bringing it forward as a design build project. We are still waiting to see what the rules for any stimulus dollars will be. Of course, we need to bring forward projects to see that they meet the requirements for whatever the stimulus will be. There's been talk about when they did the ERA projects under President Obama, the emphasis was on shovel-ready projects that are ready to advertise, put a shovel in the ground. This time around, there's been much more talk about shovel-worthy projects. Let's do projects that have lasting value rather than just spending dollars as quickly as we could, which most states ended up doing a lot of paving projects because that's what you can deliver quickly. By going to shovel-worthy projects, you can do a much broader array of projects. You can customize them to better fit purpose and need requirements and do them for an array of projects. So we think we're well positioned if there are stimulus dollars coming. But again, we're looking on those projects that are already identified within our 5-year capital plan. I believe that concludes my presentation for today. I think I'm going to turn it over to Deborah. Deborah, you there? Are you muted?
Here. I am here. Hi, thanks, Mark. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank COMTO for inviting me to talk about the DBE program. I hope the presentation will provide you with an overview of the program and provide you with a better understanding of the program requirements. Next slide, please. US DOT programs. The DBE program is a requirement of agencies receiving funds from Federal Transit Administration, Federal Highway Administration, and Federal Aviation Administration. The Connecticut Department of Transportation, as a recipient of funds from the FTA and FHWA, we are required to administer a DBE program in compliance with 49 CFR Part 26. The DBE program provides an opportunity for eligible firms to participate on UAOT projects. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, thank you. DBE certification eligibility requirements. You've heard Mark talk about potential upcoming contracts or projects. This is an opportunity if you are looking to participate on those projects. You will need to, if you are a small business or woman-owned business, getting certification will provide you with an opportunity to participate on those contracts. In order to become DBE certified, firms must submit the required DBE application to the Connecticut Department of Transportation. CONDOT is the only agency that can grant DBE certification in the state of Connecticut. DBE certification and SBE certification are not the same. Certification is not reciprocal between the two programs. To be eligible for certifications, firms must meet the US DOT eligibility criteria. Both the firm and the owner must meet program eligibility requirements. Applicant owners applying for certification must be socially and economically disadvantaged and must own a minimum of 51% of the firm. Women and minorities are part of the presumed groups for socially and economically disadvantaged. The applicant's contribution of ownership must go beyond pro forma. It needs to be real and substantial and commensurate with the percentage of ownership. And they must have the ability to control the firm. The applicant owner's personal net worth cannot exceed 1.32 million. The P&W excludes the value of the firm as well as the owner's personal residence. The applicant, the firm must be a small business as defined by US SBA, meeting that small business size standard, dependent upon the type of work that the firm is looking to become eligible for certification. The size standards vary based on the industry and are identified using the North American Industry Classification System, or as we usually call it, NAICS code. Additionally, USDOT has imposed a not to exceed cap of $26.29 million in gross receipts, which are averaged over a 3-year period. Next slide, please. The DBE application process. Applicants must apply by completing the CONDOT DBE uniform application and provide the required support documents. The application can be found on the Connecticut DOT website, and there's a link here on the slide. The application requires you to provide information about the firm and the owners. The documentation required includes personal net worth statement for each owner applying for certification, bylaws, the operating agreements, meeting minutes from shareholder meetings, resumes of key employees, bank signature cards, a copy of professional business licenses if required for the type of business that you're operating, and the most current 3 years worth of personal and company tax returns for each applicant, stock certificates, proof of contribution of capital to obtain ownership. We also conduct an interview with the owners as well as an on-site visit. If you are interested in certification, it is wise not to wait. The process can take a few months. It's dependent upon the accuracy and the completeness of the application that is submitted. The reviewers may request additional information during the review to substantiate eligibility. If you are interested in participating in the DBE program on a Connecticut DOT project, you don't want to wait for the opportunity to obtain a contract before starting the application process, because chances are if you wait until there's a project being advertised that you're interested in, it will be too late for you to obtain certification for that particular project. Once you become certified, you are not guaranteed a contract. You will still need to market your firm to prime contractors or consultants in order to obtain opportunities. You will need to be eligible. You will become eligible for DBE supportive services and opportunities to attend networking events. You will also be eligible for interstate certification, which allows a streamlined approach with regard to applying for certification in other states. It is a requirement if you are looking for certification in other states, DBE certification in other states, that you must be first certified in your home state. Next slide, please. Compliance requirements for the DBE program. The department establishes annual goals every 3 years, but the goal must be met for each federal fiscal year. And we submit goals to each of the modal agencies. So we have separate goals for Federal Highway and for Federal Transit Administration. A study is conducted by CONDOT using vendor profile information to determine the total contractor consultant availability and the availability of DBE firms. This information is then compared to upcoming projects to properly weight availability. Once the goal is determined, it is broken out by a race neutral and race conscious percentages. Race neutral means there were no goals assigned, just through open competition, DBEs were able to participate on the project. Race conscious goals are those goals that you see where there's a numerical percentage assigned to a contract or a project. We determine, based on past performance, what percentages are likely to be achieved through race neutral means. And that becomes the race neutral portion of the goal. For example, if we determine that the DBE goal based on the availability and the weighting process should be 10%, and over the past 5 years, the percentage achieved through race neutral means is 4%, then the goal would be 4% race neutral, and the remainder would be, or the 6% would become race conscious. We are first to try to satisfy our goals through race neutral means. And then if we cannot meet our goals through the race neutral means, then we would include the race conscious goals. Project goals are established through the screening committee. The projects are submitted by the initiating units with the recommended goal based on availability of subcontracting opportunities. The screening committee reviews the recommended goal to make the final determination. The committee approves the goals to ensure that the agency is meeting its annual goal requirements. Project goals are not cookie cutter, and they are adjusted as needed. If it's determined that the department is exceeding its goals, you may notice that the race conscious goals are reduced. If we're not meeting our goal requirements, then you may notice that the race conscious goals are increased. Next slide, please. Commercially useful function. Commercially useful function is a goal counting mechanism that is used. It is used to determine what percentage or what portion of the DBE participation on a contract is eligible to be counted towards DBE credit. In order to receive DBE credit, the DBE firm must perform a commercially useful function. As a contractor, that would mean that the firm is expected to perform the work using their own workforce, using their own equipment, and under their own supervision. A contractor is also required to supply and install, unless specifically it's been identified in the pre-award that they will be providing labor only. In order to act as a supplier, the firm must be certified as a supplier. Suppliers must have their own distribution equipment, except for bulk items. A minimum of 30%, and this is an important rule, a minimum of 30% of the DBE subcontract value must be performed by the DBE firm. If the DBE firm subcontracts out more than 30% of their contract value, then none of the DBE participation will count for that particular subcontractor. Next slide, please. Good faith efforts. The DBE pre-award documents must be submitted as required. That is key. If they're not submitted correctly and they don't meet the DBE program requirements, the low bid contractor may become ineligible for award. Commitments must be submitted within 5 calendar days of the bid opening. Submitted, not just dated. So those documents, those pre-award documents must be received by the department within the 5 calendar days of the bid opening. The document must also include all items to be counted towards DBE credit and must be signed by both the DBE firm and the prime contractor. Be sure to include the correct NACE code. We talked about that. That is the code that the firms are assigned, which designates what types of work they're eligible to receive DBE credit for. That NACE code should correspond to the work being performed on that particular project. Please double check the dollar value of the work to be performed. If the total is incorrect, it could cause a goal shortfall, and may impact your firm being awarded the contract. Check the DBE directory to verify the work that the firm is eligible to perform for credit. Don't just rely on what the DBE tells you. Listing a DBE for work that they're not eligible to receive DBE credit could, again, cause you a contract award. If you are unable to meet the goal, you must submit your good faith efforts, documentation, and that is identifying all of the efforts that you have made in order to satisfy that goal requirement. And your effort should be what one would reasonably expect if your intention was to meet the goal requirement. If within the 5 days, if you don't, it could cost you a contract award. If after you've been awarded the contract and there is a need to modify the pre-award commitment, you must provide 5-day constructive notice to the DBE firm, notifying them of the changes and the reasons for the changes and giving them the option to be able to appeal that to the department. After the 5 days, then the contractor may submit written requests to the department requesting to modify the pre-award commitment. And this pertains to reductions as well as terminations. It's not just when you're looking to terminate a DBE, but any reductions to any of the work that was assigned in the pre-award commitment has to follow that process. And that's regardless of who initiates the change, whether the change is initiated by the department or is initiated by the contractor. Next slide, please. Recent changes. The department no longer holds retainage on its contract and no longer allows primes to hold retainage from its subcontractors or subconsultants. Gross receipts increased on January 13th of this year from 23.98 million to 26.9 million. And that gross receipt cap, when we look at it for eligibility for the program, is based upon an average of 3 years of your gross receipts. That information we actually get from your company tax returns. Prompt payment. There is renewed emphasis on monitoring prompt payment, ensuring that prime contractors are paying their subcontractors within 30 days of being paid. Pre-award commitment, that 5-day requirement, we are kind of holding our feet are being held, it's being held to the fire with regard to our federal partners on that 5-day requirement. That is not negotiable. That is a requirement. It cannot be extended. If for some reason you are the second low bidder and you have not submitted your DBEs as the other contract, as a low bidder has, then you wouldn't get another 5 days in order to submit your DBE submissions. So all bidders should submit their DBE participation, whether they've been identified as the apparent low bidder or not. In the event that we have to go to a second or third low bidder, you want to make sure that you're still eligible to receive that contract, and that includes making sure that you've submitted your DBE commitments. Requirements that municipalities comply with CONDOT DBE program requirements. That's really important. There is only one DBE program in the state of Connecticut, and that is the one that is administered by the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Municipalities that are administering contracts that have federal funds, FTA funds, FHWA funds, they are required to follow the same requirements as if they were administering, as if they were CONDOT. So that's important to remember if you're bidding on municipal contracts, that the same requirements will apply. One thing that may change is they may change the commitment submission to requiring it with the bid. That is an option. They can require it with the bid, but it can be no later than the 5 days of the bid opening. And that kind of wraps it up for me. There's nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah and Mark. Those were very informative presentations. So now we will proceed to the question and answer session. So I'll let Tiffany handle the questions.
Okay, So it looks like we have a couple of questions. The first one is, I think for Mark, if the heavy truck user fee is implemented, will it be done so via electronic readers?
So that's a good question. And I'm actually not sure. I don't believe that it will be. The actual highway user fee will not be paid directly to the department. It'll be established under rules that will be written by the Department of Revenue Services, and they will follow whatever methodology they determine is most beneficial to them. I suspect for truckers right now, there's an IFTA requirement, which is very similar to the highway user fee. I think they will use that as a model and follow the IFTA requirements to the extent there's overlap between the two. And that's much more of a logbook than it is anything fancy like a reader, electronic reader.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So we have another question here that came into the chat. This one is for Deborah. What is the state's DBE, SBE, WE percent obligation?
With regard to the DBE goal for federal highway is 13.1%. That's the overall that will midst of the process of coming up with the goals for the next 3 years. For FTA, it's 8.6% is the DBE goal for FTA.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. So another question for Mark, will tolls be part of any future capital programs?
I don't think there's an appetite to go back to tolls. It was a bruising debate, not this past legislative session, but the one before that. And the governor put his full weight behind it and couldn't make it happen. It actually never even came up for a vote. So this past session, there were two proposals that were being considered. One was to have a use fee, and that passed. The other was the Transportation Climate Initiative, which was a carbon-based cap and trade program, and that didn't pass this session. So I think what you'll see is probably more nibbling around the edges and different strategies. I don't think you're going to see a tolling program in Connecticut. There's just too much resistance to moving that forward.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Another question for Deborah. Can Deborah speak to the process for DBE certification if a firm has certification from another state?
Okay, so if your home state is another state outside of Connecticut, then and you're coming to Connecticut to apply under interstate certification, you would submit, there's an affidavit, that you would have to sign off that your firm is eligible for certification in terms of your gross receipts meet the size standard, and that the company owners do indeed own the business. You would then also include a copy of your full application that you submitted to your home state for certification, for DBE certification, and any backup documentation, annual updates of no change, the tax returns, the personal net worth statements. So you would submit that information. You do not have to complete a new application. You would just submit the application that you submitted to your home state.
Okay, and then we have a similar question here in the chat asking you to review the process for DBE, but also asking which states apply.
Which states apply? The DBEs are nationwide. So the program, every single state that receives federal USDOT funds is required to have a DBE program. So you can be certified in every single state if you apply, if you should wish to and apply. But just keep in mind that you must first be certified in your home state. So if Connecticut is your home state, you'll want to get certified here first, and then you will pursue interstate certification in the other states. So there's no limitation, and there are no residency requirements in terms of where your where your firm must be located in order to be certified in the DBE program.
Thank you, Deborah. Another one for Deborah. Has the department considered setting goals that exceed the minimum amount required by the federal government?
Okay, so when we set our 3-year goals, we are required to meet those annually, but that becomes our target. That is our goal. So we're not supposed to look to go over or beyond that goal or to fall or to get less than that goal requirement. So that is our target. And that's how we keep our program narrowly tailored and meet the strict scrutiny guidelines that the Supreme Court passed with regard to the Adirondack decision that was made. I think it was back in probably 1999 that the program had to be narrowly tailored. So no, we're not looking to exceed our goals.
Great, thank you. That's all I see for questions right now. Sharon, if anyone has any questions, I know we only have a couple minutes left.
Well, I have one question for Mark. I was just wondering, how did the COVID-19 impact the capital program or any, projects that were in construction during that time?
Yeah, Sharon, it impacted us in a couple of different ways. Early on, when the pandemic first hit, of course, nobody knew what the rules were going to be. And we did have some projects that were shut down for a short period of time. But that was sort of the bad news. The good news was traffic was so much reduced, both in the highway system and in the rail system and the transit system, that we were quickly able to recover. And Governor Lamont, unlike some other states, decided he wasn't going to shut down construction projects. So early on in the pandemic, with traffic conditions so low, we were able to extend work windows. We allowed some more extended lane closures on the highway. We actually shut down the Waterbury branch, Metro North, and bused those passengers and completed work much more quickly than we would have otherwise. So we were able to recover all the lost time for the most part on our projects by accelerating work shortly into the pandemic. Aside from construction projects, though, we had to continue developing projects through the design process. And I'm happy to report that our metrics in terms of project delivery, completing designs and putting them out on the street, they were better during COVID than they were prior to COVID. That's despite that almost all of our workforce was working remotely. We scrambled to get more than 1,000 people the ability to sign in and work from their homes, and we still delivered projects. The metrics, as I said, were better this year than they were in any of the previous 5 years. So that was encouraging. We're glad that happened. It worked out that way.
Great, thank you. I see there's some more. Oh, go ahead.
Yep. We have no problem. We have a question here. When do you estimate that the president's infrastructure dollars will trickle down from state to MPOs and municipalities? So that's probably a question for Mark.
Yeah, so my crystal ball is a little cloudy on this. There have been fits and starts in the American Job Act. What the Senate wants to do seems to be different than what the House wants to do. So I really can't say for sure. We're trying to be ready as soon as it happens. The breakdown of what's going to come to the state DOTs and what's going to go to municipalities and the MPOs, that's a complete unknown to us. There are some theories out there that Secretary Buttigieg, having come from the mayor of a municipality, that some of it's going to be more targeted in that direction, but we simply don't know. We are reacting just like everyone else.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, I think that's it now. Oh, one more. How can we get the recording of this program? So that's probably a question for Sharon.
Yes, the recording will be sent by way, a link to the recording will be sent by way of email to all the attendees.
Great. think that's it,
Okay.
Sharon.
Yeah, well, we're at the 2:30 mark, and I just want to thank Mark Ralph and Deborah Gauss for the valuable presentations that they made. And I want to thank the attendees for coming. And I want to have a special thank you for our COMTO members who helped make this event successful. Eugene Chang, Tiffany Garcia, and Sharmista Gauss. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. And look for the next COMTO event. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.